Hey family, I'm a new auntie. I'm Auntie JBH to Jaylen Bledsoe. Now, I'm not really his blood auntie, but I love that we have a great relationship that feels like family. Jaylen is the chairman of the Bledsoe Collective and managing director of Flair Partners. He served on AT&T Supplier Diversity Board, and he's going to share with us some interesting outcomes from his relationship with them. He's also advised White House officials in President Obama's administration on economic policies impacting small businesses, and he served on various nonprofit organization boards. More importantly, he's built a business that is intertwining doing well and doing good at the same time. Let's enjoy. Tina, it's great to have you join me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited for today's dialogue.
Yeah, I know that you're interrupting a robust schedule to talk with me, so we're going to jump right into it because you've achieved measurably incredible success as a young entrepreneur. Now, starting your own technology consulting company at the age of 12, wow, this may sound a little bit cute to our family who are listening right here. So validate this and take us back to then.
Absolutely. So let me take you back even beyond 12 years old. I was born to two teenage parents who had me in high school. I always say they were high school lovebirds. That's when it ended. But ultimately, I grew up in this space of poverty with my mother. And over time, I had this desire to not be in the space that we were in. I got tired of hearing no. I always joke and say I was a fat kid who loved Snickers and I loved a king size Snicker. And I got tired of hearing no when I made that request. And so I've kind of always had this way of finding ways to make money beyond the money that was in our couches. And so before even the tech company, I decided to cut grass in third grade. I wanted this camera and cut grass one time in the heat of a St. Louis summer and realized that it was not for me as the heat was hitting me too much. So I got my friends and my neighbors to cut grass for me. And that summer I made $3,000 getting my friends to cut our neighborhood and neighborhoods beyond. And since then I've been on a roll. So that tech company at 12 was called initially a businessman's IT solution. I taught myself to program and build websites, and that's what I was doing for everyone between that or tech support, and quickly realized that I had built something that was a little bit beyond what I could do by myself. And so began to get contractors on from India and ultimately getting them on here in the States. And that company grew really fast with the help of an attorney to help incorporate. And by the time I was 16 years old, we were doing about $3.5 million a year in revenue.
That's absolutely incredible, and regardless of age. However, I do want to learn a little bit more about your childhood and your family then, because you talked several points that can be broken down a little bit. I think not only as being interesting, but teaching points. One of them is you referenced having made connections with India. I'm curious to know how you were able to do that. Even in front of that, Jaylen, though, talk a little bit about what your exposure was to the products and the tools that allowed you to teach yourself to program and
Absolutely.
code. Do you code as well?
Yes, so I haven't coded much recently, but initially I taught myself 7 languages. So if I start off at that pivotal moment of learning how to code, I went to Miami to visit my grandmother who lived there, and this is when Borders was closing down. And they had all their books on sale for great prices. And I bought 10 books for $100 and taught myself 7 languages to program over about 4 to 5 weeks that summer. And that was that pivotal moment of my introduction to what it meant to build on tech beyond just support tech. And from there, I got, of course, clients that were paying me no money. Some were paying me $10 for a website. Some were paying me $100 for a website. And some were paying me $10 an hour. And of course, on those, I took long on purpose as my first hourly gigs. But
Well,
as I
we need
built
to
that,
refresh. Hey, Jaylen, we need to refresh our website. So I don't know if you're still doing it for those rates.
not those rates, but we can take care of you for sure. But taught myself so that era of development, finding clients, and ultimately I discovered I was a great developer in terms of understanding what was there, but I didn't want to do that every day, and nor was I a designer. So I could develop something, but it didn't look the best, and ultimately at scale, it wasn't my space to be in day to day. And so I went into a website called at the time Elance. And on Elance, you could find contractors of the different skill sets around the world. And that was my discovery of, wow, I can get someone in India to do what I'm doing here for a fraction of the price with a much better skill set and capabilities. And that was the beginning of understanding what it meant to contract out. And to be honest, I think that's been the model we've followed ever since as an organization. You know, we have 18 or so full-time staff members, but the rest are all contractors, because I recognize that beyond the cost factor, it's the diversity of skill set that I can get from those who are around the country, especially those who are in the States across, you know, many different regions here in the U.S.
So you went back home. Where was home after a summer with your grandma?
Home for me is St. Louis, Missouri.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in St. Louis. What were you said you grew up in I would say poor circumstance, poverty, but not poor. You had a lot of things that enriched you. Talk a little bit about that. Give us a feeling for young Jaylen and what was going on in your life.
Absolutely. So, of course, finances were not there, but luckily on the financial world, my great grandparents were the ones who said, hey, Jaylen has cousins who live 30 minutes away, and this is the life that they have. How can we invest our time and our energy to be sure that he has something as close as he can to them? And so whether it was piano, so one of the moments of life for me was my great grandfather was a Hall of Fame blues musician, piano player. And so he had pianos in every room of his house. And one day I touched one of those keys.
You have a grand piano, don't you? You have a grand piano, don't you?
Yes, ma'am. Right beneath me right now in this home. And I hit one of those keys, or two of the keys, and it sounded good enough that my grandparents were like, you know what, Jaylen? You're in piano lessons starting next week. And that was in first or second grade. And the commitment to be sure that I was at rehearsals or practices every week, the commitment to be sure that, hey, you're really good at this. You should join the school jazz band. But hey, Grandma, I'm only in second grade. That starts in fourth grade. Well, my grandma went to that school and said, hey, he's going to play you some music right now and blow your socks off. He's going to join your jazz band a year or two earlier than what he can join it. And began to join the jazz band in second, third grade every summer for that school. And so rather it was piano, rather it was swimming. You know, swimming was a big part. You know, it was swimming lessons every summer for a few years. So they looked at what can we get him that gets him the same experiences that his cousins who are in Lake St. Louis are enduring. And that was their commitment. And I look back at that moment as a big factor as to why I have these experiences. I think beyond that, you know, those grandparents, my dad's father, my grandfather, made sure I was at church every Sunday. And taking me to church every Sunday, for me, receiving the word was amazing. But I'm also the guy who's like, how can I help push this mission forward? And so I remember in first or second grade, I was the multimedia operator for the kids' church. So I'm the one moving the slides forward or doing the lyrics or making the graphics, and jump forward to, you know, really that being an impetus for where I'm at today. So jump forward to fourth or fifth grade, that church launched a Saturday night service, and they needed volunteers to help move the adult church forward. And so I volunteered to pull cables in that ministry. Then went from pulling cables to running a camera by the time I was in fifth or sixth grade for that service. And then ultimately finding another church here in the St. Louis area and becoming the area volunteer for all their campuses and broadcast. And that was really where I got even deeper into technology. So there's a lot of parallel between these investments for my family, my exposure, me touching technology, and understanding what it meant to scale and monetize those skills that I developed.
Jaylen, many of the people I've met who succeed in the tech world, particularly if they themselves have been coders or programmers, are also engaged in music in some way beyond just listening to it. Do you think there's a parallel there?
Yeah, and now that you say that, I think there is a parallel. I think there is a structure in music that is parallel and models what's happening in coding, and that structure and that's patterns, and it's essentially another language. And I think once you can master one or the other, you've understood what it meant to translate real time and to build patterns based on what you're being exposed to. So rather it's learning Spanish, rather it's learning piano, or rather it's learning HTML, there's a set of structure that you have to follow and replicate over and over again to both master but also understand what it means and how each key on that piano or each key on that guitar or each key that you're typing and coding, how it impacts the next.
So, do you think there's a message or a lesson in that for how we look at funding schools, especially public schools today?
Absolutely. So let me take a step back. So I'm currently on the board of an organization here in St. Louis called Wyman Center. And we had a documentary screening just a few days ago. And in this screening, we looked at the impacts of COVID-19 on families, especially families who were single mothers with multiple kids, and the difficulties that these families had both during it, but also the impacts that these kids have been left behind, of course, following COVID and figuring out what it means. And one of the questions we talked about, what is a solution to the number of kids who were left behind? And it really was a government that knows how to work together and spend money efficiently. That would be one thing. But secondly, what does it mean to create experiences that are unique to each student? And so there may be a student who learns best via patterns and structure like music or coding, or it may be best with someone who needs hands-on support. And so I think for me, the key to how we better education in these different areas of the economy or geography ultimately comes down to how do we create unique experiences that are tailored to the needs of each student. And so for me, I was a kid who was a few years behind at all time, a few years ahead at all times, and loved the coding, and loved the music, and that's how I would learn best. But there might be a student who that's not their way of engagement, and we have to create that experience for them and their peers in that season and space.
I do recall when my own children were babes, one teacher told me, "Oh, one of your children learns regardless of which approach we take, but your other child is a better audio learner than visual learner. If we can talk with this child, the intake is amazing. If we simply leave this child to read, then the responses and how we get aren't there." So I'm there with you. And I think that's true for us throughout life, that we have to be attentive, and that can shift, that can grow as it did with my children. Let's talk a little bit about you trailblazing in the tech industry. Challenges, Jaylen, did you face as that young entrepreneur, and how did you overcome them in order to build such a thriving business?
Absolutely. I always say it was interesting for me in my early journey. And it's interesting because it was a major show of just how God called me to be where I am today versus me haphazardly finding my way here, because a lot of what I would consider potentials for challenges were almost overcame either immediately or before they became a challenge. And so, of course, one of the things is I was a minor with business, with parents who were not in business. My mom works as a pharmacy technician at the time. My dad was an educator. So I didn't have the space to say, hey, parents, I have a business idea. Can you fund it? Can you help me get the structure to make it legal? So there's this moment, and I was making in seventh grade about $150 an hour for 20 hours a week consistently between the web development, outsourcing, and of course the tech support. And I went to a bank, the bank to be unnamed, and I went in there and I sat down and talked to the branch manager about getting the business account open. And I've always had in my life a mustache, some level of a beard, and some level of a receding hairline. So I've always looked about 20 years older than what I was at the time. So I'm at the bank, and we're there for 2 hours, got all the paperwork done, signed the documents, and he asked for my ID. And I give him my ID, and it's my middle school ID that says I'm in seventh grade. And he looked at me, I looked at him, and we stared at each other for a few minutes. And he said, "Hey, you've wasted 2 hours of my time. Leave my office and don't come back." And this was a devastating blow to the time we just spent, but also to scale this thing, I need a bank account. And I know from prior conversations, my mom was very hesitant to put her name on a business because she didn't understand how that might impact some of her resources and support she was getting. You know, if she has income coming from this business, could that impact whatever support she was getting from, the government at the time? And so I went home and I Googled St. Louis's best business attorney, called the first one. His name was Paul Hales, and said, "Hey, I'm Jaylen Bledsoe. I have this vision for a business. Here's where we are, of course, in the life cycle. I need your help, but I can't afford you." And he said, "Okay, well, I love that you called me. I love your passion. I love the dedication. Come to my office on Saturday and I'll see what we can do." So I had my grandfather take me, and my grandfather, of course, was hesitant. I'm taking you to this attorney's office. Why? You can't afford him. So we sit down in the office, and he's probably a 65-year-old, older white male who fought in wars, and he had a lot of time here on Earth. And he says, here's what we're going to do. If you can manage a computer for me and a printer in my office, I'm going to give you some support to help you build this business out legally. But what was unique beyond that, beyond just, hey, here's some advice, beyond just, hey, let's go file your LLC and get it out of the way, every Saturday for 4 hours for a year, my grandfather would take me there. He would drop me off. I would go manage a computer, reset the printer, support on the website with SEO, and that attorney would teach me business law, business tort, contract law. And he was committed to, by the end of our time together, that if I ever needed to draft a contract, if I ever needed to launch a new business, I could have a deep understanding of what went into it behind him just doing it for me. And so again, back to that old adage, I'd rather teach you how to fish than give you a fish. And this is what that attorney did for me throughout that entire journey. So today, at 25, the business is much bigger. We have attorneys on retainer, but all of our first draft of contracts I do myself, and they make small revisions. Down to accounting, we have CPAs on retainer, but I think it was 2 years ago I had a kidney stone, and this is a side journey. I had a kidney stone, and I was on pain medicine. And over those 3 days of being on the medicine, I did all of our company taxes in 3 days, 24 hours, no sleep over these 3 days, gave it to our CPAs. And because of the experience that my accountant did at that same time that attorney recommended me and teaching me how to do accounting and, of course, business finance, I sent it to our CPAs, and they had 0 adjustments to make on the form before they sent it to the IRS. And so ultimately, it goes back to this idea of every time I've had a challenge, I found someone who could not just do it for me, but teach me how to do it. And ultimately, that's the same way we behave today in our foundation and in our work with communities, is how do we teach people how to do what we've done, or how to learn these new skills versus just giving them the finance or the thing they need in that moment.
Certainly, we don't recommend that people do their own finances under the influence of medication. However, it does speak very well to the training and the education, as well as your own natural talent that you were able to deliver to that. And it's just so fascinating for me. You and I first met at a faith-based event, and I'm just so happy that through the ministry and through the outreach in economics and business that Bishop T.D. Jakes and his lovely wife, Sarita, are doing, that you and I were able to come together under such a wonderful environment and now share our love for business. What I'd like you to do, Jaylen, is talk a little bit about this thing. Through both Bledsoe Collective and Flair Partners, you've helped provide innovative solutions and support to many companies. Share a little bit, especially by example, of some of the projects that have stood out for you, those in terms of making significant impact in the areas you care about.
Absolutely. One of the ways that I've grown this company over the last 11, 12 years has been asking one question, and it's, what are the challenges that you're facing? And that question has allowed us to meet the needs of our clients beyond maybe what we were focused on in that season as an organization. And so today, Flair Partners is this evolution of the first company, Bledsoe Technologies, because I asked someone a question, and we went from being a tech consulting firm to supporting a celebrity talent in their digital strategy. So that at that point, it was Steve Harvey, and supporting Steve Harvey with his digital strategy. Ask someone else the next question, what are you facing as a challenge right now? And we saw this area of, if we could grow a customer's front door with marketing, there was this issue with scaling the structure of their staff and teams to execute with those new clients. And so we built out the consulting firm at the time called Flair Consulting Partners. And so today it's called Flair Partners with 3 unique divisions: digital tech analytics, marketing communications, and management operations. One of the calls I received probably 4 or 5 years ago, I spoke at an event, the NABJ annual conference in Detroit, and met an executive
And
from AT.
NABJ is the National Association of Black Journalists?
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
Yes,
ma'am.
okay.
And met an executive from AT&T at that panel, on that panel. And after she passed my information internally to, leaders, and I received a phone call about a week later from the CEO and one of the presidents of a unit there saying, hey, we have this ambitious goal to increase our spend with Black suppliers. Can you help us out? Had never touched supplier diversity. I'd only been a Black supplier in this space, and we were engaged to support them in a strategy to increase their spend threefold within 2 years with Black suppliers across their entire ecosystem of spend at AT&T. An amazing experience. But what it taught me as a CEO, as a consultant, is that yes, sometimes we are the sole expert in one area of practice, but also there's opportunities to utilize our experience and strategy and structure and understanding and problem solving to provide a solution to any type of problem that a customer or organization may have. But also in that same case, there's an opportunity for me and for my team to also learn from the client in that example and in that use case. And so today as an organization, we do this time and time again. What's your challenge? How can we apply our understanding of problem solving, of strategies, of systems and scale to the challenges that you're facing? But also always say, how do I get paid to get a degree from your organization? And so how do I learn from the AT&Ts or the Fords or the NBC Universals of the world while I'm in the room? Because they have billions of dollars of retained knowledge that are working in those offices. And if I can walk in with my knowledge and my experience, but walk away learning 10 times more than I gave them, in some cases, I think we've both won. They've won with the problem that they were facing in that season, but also I've been able to develop myself and my organization and my teams with new skill sets and experiences that they would have otherwise had.
Absolutely. Jaylen, today many aspiring entrepreneurs struggle with finding their legacy passions outside of their unique businesses. With the advantage of so much transparency and information, it can overwhelm because we see everything. And for an entrepreneurial person, oftentimes your interests are open. How did you discover your passion for the specific humane impacts you're making surrounding technology and consulting?
If I had to be honest, I would say what I have come to learn, my core interest is not business. It's not technology. It's not helping the world and solving the world's biggest needs. It's chasing after challenges. If I go back to this moment as a kid, I remember that if my mother told me to clean my room, it was the biggest battle. I do not want to do it. I do not want to keep this same thing the same exact way every week. So if there was ever a moment where I had to do this big cleanup of my room or the house, I would spend that entire day reorganizing it, redesigning it, reshaping it versus just getting it back to where it was before. And as I look at this journey for me in business and our foundation and any of our philanthropic efforts as an individual, as an organization, it goes back to what are the challenges that I can find and I can solve. So when I think about this question for someone else, how do you find what your interest is? I would say remove the label of what the society calls it, right? You're an entrepreneur, you're an investor, you're a great creative, you're a great whatever, but just find the core of what you find yourself going back to do often. Is it the drawing? Is it the strategizing? Is it the, creating of music? Or is it getting things back to the way that it was at some point? And so don't worry about a label and finding out what it means to have an interest, but find out what the action is that you find yourself enjoying the most, that you would do without pay, without title, without structure, without notoriety, because you love doing that one thing. One of the best examples I have had, I was talking with a pilot recently. So I pursued my pilot's license over the last 2 years and talked about, what is it that you like about this thing? And for him, it wasn't flying above the clouds. It wasn't the landing. It wasn't the rush of aviation. It was, yeah, I'm one of 300,000 people in the US that can do this one thing right here. And that was his passion, was being one of so many of a limited group of people to have this prestige of having a skill set that many others didn't have. So I hope that answered your question. But for me, it goes back to what's the action that you'd like to do beyond maybe the title that would categorize that.
It splendidly does. And removing the titles, I think, is key and a great hack for people who are looking for just that right now. So thank you. Building a successful company requires strong leadership skills. Share some of the skills your that are into your key principles and your values, because these have definitely shaped your leadership approach. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oftentimes in organizations, and this is me putting my consultant hat on for a second, we're often looking for the employee that can stay with us for 40 years. And I think some of that is also a generational change of an employee being around, having that retained knowledge, the investment in that employee that stays with us for as long as it's possible. And of course, there's been many debates about Gen Z and millennial changing that to be this 1 to 2 year course. What I've learned, and it goes back to the fact that I could not hire employees as a kid, was I don't want someone who only has the way that we think as an organization. I want a diversity of perspective and understanding and experiences and approach at the table when we're chasing after any challenge that we're solving. And so because I could only hire contractors and consultants when I was 14, 15, 16, 17, and 18, we got that easily. We got this variety of consultants and contractors who worked at other firms or who were full-time freelancers who could bring their approach to our organization to help us solve a challenge for our clients or for our own needs. So going back to this thought about, as a consultant, organizations want someone who's there for 20, 30, 40 years. But one of the things that I've pressed our team is I don't want to have an employee who's with us for 10 years. I don't want someone who's with us for 5 years. I want to develop the best that I can in investing in someone's ability and their skill sets and their experiences and sending them to the next place so they can grow even further. Because I understand that as an organization, we're going to grow. We're going to have much bigger challenges. We went from helping the mom and pops to helping Fortune 10 companies and their strategies and approaches. However, that employee that I hire in 2016, for me, by 2026, they should have an entirely different perspective because they have had different experiences, different encounters, and a different boss, a different leader. Because as much as I'm growing, I'm still Jaylen, and I still have an approach that I want to take to get things done. And so my biggest level, my biggest skill, my biggest approach to building an organization is stay here for as long as you're called to be here. I don't want you a day longer. I'm not going to let you go a day earlier. I want you to be here for the right timing that you need to develop and to become who you're called to be while I have you under my covering. And with God's fullest blessing, go to your next place. And we'll support you. And if there's ever a time that you should come back here or consult for us or advise us on a project or a contract, that's what I desire. And so with that, it shifts the love, it shifts the responsibility of retaining talent to developing talent. And one of the biggest brags I have as an organization is the number of clients who will hire our contractors full-time because they loved how much they were developed in the time that they were here with us. We had this internship a few years back, and it was a 12-month internship called the Creator Program. And out of that program, we had 5 creators that were onboarded for this test. And out of those 5, 4 of them were all hired from us within 6 months of their internship out of the 12-month program. And I think the retention of those employees at those organizations is 100% still. They're still in those places. They've grown, they've developed, they've become managers and leaders. And to see that stamp of Jaylen touched this, and here they are thriving in a new space and environment, means the world to me in our organization.
Absolutely, I think it should. And you talked a few minutes ago about your love of diversity of thought and growth of thought. you've placed emphasis on and a lot of focus on diversity and inclusion as well. Elaborate a little bit on the importance of fostering diversity in the tech industry. And Jaylen, talk about the strategies you personally implemented to create an inclusive work environment.
That is $1 million question. Honestly, it's $1 billion question. So I remember I got a call from a Fortune 100 a few years ago, a tech company, and they wanted us to work with them on creating a pipeline. This pipeline was not what you would imagine, meaning high school students or college students. They had us investing in building programs for kindergartners to get them exposed to tech. And I'll be honest, we're sitting there creating this program, and I'm like, this is great. However, the length of time to see the ROI on this pipeline that you've developed for a kindergartner is at least 15 years, in best case. But what that experience taught me is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is twofold. It's one for the ecosystem. How can I develop a pipeline and get a community exposed and developed so that even if one day I never have the chance to hire them, but there's now one more person who is Black or brown or female in the tech space that is interested or exposed or developed in technology to be hired by any one of these tech companies or organization is a major win. But secondly, what is our effort to develop even those who are ready to be hired in terms of age and time in life at our organization? So one of our clients today is this tech boot camp, and we're helping them, they have a really good pipeline for veteran talent to have second career chances in technology. So getting veterans, getting them upskilled within 12 to 14 weeks, and then getting them placed at a major organization within 6 months of graduation. Mind-blowing, the data that I'm seeing in terms of the success here. But that's the question I have to ask myself is, how do we do more of that? And so that's their business model for their organization, to find the talent, develop the talent, and to place the talent. For my team, I'm asking, how do we find our own talent that's not yet developed and develop them for us? And so that's a lot of what our internships have been, our creator programs. Our internships aren't people running to get coffee. They're not managing calendars. And to be quite frank, I don't have one assistant in our organization that manages calendars. I can do that. Technology can do that. I'm here to develop someone. My best assistants are chief of staffs. My best assistants become operation executives. But our best interns are coming in to learn and develop the skill in technology or accounting or marketing and strategy. And so for us, it's finding good talent with high IQ, high EQ, that are brown, that are Black, that are women, that are the entire array of diversity, and getting in good mindset, developing that mindset, and getting them into early career roles as fast as we can, and letting them develop in that way. And so for us, it's more about the work and doing it versus the DEI title, because I think you see this often. Most companies have a phenomenal DEI director or vice president who's there by title, but not by funding or by function. And so for us, it's about how do we put this to work and actually see talent be developed for the entire ecosystem or for our hiring pipeline.
Yes, and earlier this morning, around 5 a.m. my time, I was reading an article by a respected source that DE&I is waning, and that funding for it has gone down 18% in this since last year this time, and that DE&I and ESG are not as often showing up in published reports from major companies now, which can indicate a lessening of the focus on it from those organizations and their leadership. Your, Jaylen, entrepreneurial and philanthropic efforts are so well intertwined that it is obvious you're making impact in your communities in ways that I think just become inherent to the way you're growing business. Are there other initiatives you've undertaken to make these types of impacts that you want to talk about?
Absolutely. One of my, so as I mentioned earlier, I pursued my pilot's license. And as I was going through that journey in Los Angeles, I spent the first year of that at KBNY, Van Nuys Airport there in LA, and the rest of it here in St. Louis. And out of that experience, from learning to fly to buying my own aircraft to commuting with that aircraft between multiple airports to flying in Hawaii and across the country, I saw two people of color who were out there. One of them was a Black woman. And when I look at the data for aviation, and I'm going to butcher the number, let's say it's 400,000 licensed U.S. pilots of course, in the country, less than, I believe it's 3% are Black, and less than 0.8% are Black women. And so we launched a scholarship about 2 years ago, and essentially all of our corporate clients had to commit to fund at least one of these scholarships as a part of their engagement with our consulting firm. And we funded, I believe, 5 or 6 full ride aviation scholarships for Black women to get their private pilots or their IVR certifications. And so for us, I don't have a lot to brag about in terms of here's the program you can check out on our website. For me, it's about doing the work and not bragging about the work, because I think it's important that I see personally impacting growth in these stories, that I see communities be developed, that I see those who would not otherwise have the information, the exposure, or the development in an area get that opportunity. I recently launched a YouTube channel, and it came out of a ton of questions from friends saying, hey, can you explain inflation to me? But like make it simple using ketchup as an example. And so I do this explainer on like how does inflation impact ketchup, and how does deflation impact ketchup? And as I launched this channel, I've been in this discovery of mission and vision. And one day I accidentally said on a video, for me, it's not about breaking news. To me, it's not about all the fat that's taking place in the news cycle, but it's about understanding what's in the cycle that matters to you and how does it impact you. Because one of my biggest fears, especially for Black and brown communities, is that we hear the news, we see the news, but we don't know how it impacts us and how we should navigate that news. And so if a recession is coming, how should a Black household prepare for that? How should a Black entrepreneur prepare for that? And honestly, Black, brown, any color,
Any
any age,
household,
any household, how does this news impact you and why does it matter? And how should you make decisions based off of what's happening? And so for me, it's about that development.
Yes, and I think you would have been present to one of Bishop's conversations around the time to worry about the price of chicken, I think he said, is not when it's on the shelf. You need to be paying attention to Wall Street, and you need to be paying attention to your voter opportunity so that you can have an economy that is driving in the direction you need it to be. But more importantly, you're driving in the direction you need to be. And I just think that's beautiful. It's no surprise to me that there are numerous endeavors that you undertake with success that give positive impact to your community, because your company is so well defined and built on the principle of doing well and doing good at the same time. It's about pulling it out to find it out, not about deciding now we've had a good year, we're going to focus on this. I love that about you. There is a lot of emphasis in the media right now, Jaylen, on chat and AI. Most people, regardless of their individual industries or focuses, are aware that the tech industry is constantly evolving. How do you stay ahead of the curve and continue to offer cutting edge solutions to your clients in such a rapidly changing landscape?
Absolutely. One of the most critical things that I pursue and that I encourage our team to pursue when it comes to innovation in technology, in marketing, in org strategy is two things. One being the best consumer that we can be. And so I don't have every Apple device, every PC device, every camera that I could own just because I want to own it. I have it to understand what's changing between these generations. But secondly, I have this playground. And I think in tech, we know this idea of a tech playground. You go in there, you play around with it, you break it, and it's okay if you break it. And I encourage our teams to be in that same mindset, even on our engagements. Don't go in and use simply the best practices. Use best practices for 50% of the time, but 50%, be okay with breaking something. We have insurance for that reason. Be okay with testing. Be okay with exploring and utilizing real-time data to change what worked, what didn't, and of course make changes from that. And so for us, when it comes to technology, ChatGPT, going back to the NFT conversation, going back to the blockchain conversation, it is literally being a consumer of it, playing in the playground in these private spaces, but also in public with our clients, and see what works and see what doesn't, and be okay with saying, we tried this, it didn't work, but here's what we're going to try next. And that's where success is often found.
I'm with you there, 100% with you there. And you know what? Thinking ahead with so much going on right now, what are your aspirations for the near future and the long-term future? And if you don't mind, personal and professional.
Oh man. Okay, so the professional, I just came out of a 40-day Daniel fast. And one of the questions I was asking in this fast was simply, hey God, I don't have a question for you. I don't have a prayer for you. I don't have a request for you. I just want your will and your guidance on what I should be doing next. And so I'm in this space of discovery. One of the things I received from that fast God gave me was to explore, to experiment. And I think as I break that down, that's not just in the context of developing new skill. I think it's in defining and understanding areas of interest, areas of hobby, areas of what bring me fun, what I love to play in beyond just the day-to-day of discovering challenge. And I think this is important because I'm 25 years old. I've been in this space since I was 11 and 12 years old. The only paycheck I've ever received was signed by me. The only W-2s I've ever had have been signed by me. So I know nothing other than the context of Jaylen, the business, and the brand. So the next few years, I think, is a process of discovery, of finding what else is there that I want to pursue and what does that look like. I joked and I told my parents, oh, go ahead, sorry.
No. I was just going to say that's a beautiful place to be. Please, you were telling your parents.
No, telling my parents, I think it's the prime example of a quarter life crisis. 25 years old, a quarter of my life. And it's not a crisis because it's not in any way a negative space, but it's a space of true exploration and figuring out what the next quarter looks like, what it feels like, how it's engaged. I'm single. I'm looking for my wife. I'm looking for a hard. I bought and built her this beautiful house. I'm just waiting for her to come and join me in it. And so that is what I believe the next quarter is. It's finding her hopefully in the next year or two, but really building out this life of family, of partnership. Because as I look at the business I've built, I often say I build it with the intention of today of it being fun, of it being, it's solving challenges. I'm traveling. I spend a third of the year in hotels, even though I don't want to at some point now. But I can do it so freely because I don't have the family to go back home to in my home. So I think the next quarter of this life is going to be figuring out this balance of doing business, but also doing family. Because I'll tell you right now, let me find my wife and I might miss some meetings. It might just be, you know what? I'm taking off on Monday, Thursday, and Friday. I'll work on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I don't know what that is. So I think that's the next portion of this life. This next quarter is finding a balance of finding that partner, finding that family, and understanding for me, not society, not expectations, how I want to balance family and life and what that breakdown looks like.
Well, there are two things I'll say about that, Jaylen. One is enjoy this quarter life pause you're in. It is not a crisis, it's a pause. And I think that pause is relevant because it allows you to quiet, to really be who you are as well. The second thing I'll tell you is don't search too hard for her because she's going to find you. Trust me, she will. You talked about building that home for her. You know, most of us are aware that when many athletes earn and receive that big first paycheck, their first purchase is a house for mama. You see, hey mom, thank you, mom. What was your first big purchase?
Oh man. Okay, so there's a few.
And I happen to know you did build a home for your mama as well. So let's get that
Yes.
out of the
Yeah.
way.
Mom has a house. Dad is good. Family's good. For me, the first big purchase, honestly, it was a car. But I've also recognized that that is my thing. I don't care about the expensive clothes. I don't care about the expensive trips to Belize and Barbados to stay for a month in a palace. For me, I love vehicles. I was looking yesterday at one of my reports, and I think the average length of me owning a car is about 9 to 12 months. I love
Mhm.
to search for technology, the innovation in vehicles, and experience new things. So cars are.
Have you bought old and new cars? I mean, it aligns that with the techie side of you that you're going to be interested in a tech mobile. What types are you interested in?
So primarily new cars. So I've had the Teslas, I've had the electric Mercedes, I've had both gas and of course electric, and then I also love the riding motorcycles. I love the experience to get in there and drive a stick shift and to be in manual, to actually to think about how I'm driving versus it being of course automatic. So I love it all. I love just the change of scenery because I think of course we spend a bulk of our life in our homes, we spend a bulk of our life in our offices, and we spend a bulk of our life in our vehicles. And for me, the experience that my vehicle brings me is something that's really important to the day to day. And some days it's driving to a meeting, and some days it's just driving to drive and enjoy the road and let the wind hit my hair and let it flow.
Piloting yourself to a meeting. So you conquered the air and the land. What about sea? Are you a boater? Have you shown any interest there yet? Or is that something you and she will discover together?
I've definitely had my great boat experiences. A pilot's license, driver's license. I didn't know that you had to have a boater's license. So I was in West Palm Beach with a client a few years back, and I got pulled over driving a jet ski, and I did not get a ticket, but he gave me a warning for not having my boater's license. And so I apparently have to go get that next, and I can really enjoy the waters. But again, for me, waters, I don't know if it's U.S. waters or if it's U.S. but Hawaii waters. I think Hawaii waters might be the space that I would love to just explore further and enjoy.
I have several friends who keep encouraging me to come join them on their yachts, and they place them everywhere in the world. And I've not gotten there yet either, Jaylen. And I think you're in a different quarter of your life than I am. So once you decide to go on water, maybe you'll make room for me as well as a passenger. I'll be ready by then.
Absolutely. Well, they say owning a boat is probably one of the most expensive things to do because it costs money to
It
keep
is.
afloat. And so
It is.
I'm a logical
It is.
spender. I'm a logical like my cars I can enjoy them every day. My planes I can get in them, I can fly them, and I know what it's gonna. The idea of something just floating and spending money by just existing there, I'm not sure I'll be there anytime soon from a mental
You,
space.
you know the trade-offs. There are trade-offs to everything as well. My children won't let me fly on a private flight because they say that's too much gas for one person. I think there are trade-offs that we encounter in our lives, and where we are in our lives influence that in that moment. I'm just so thrilled. It's thrilling for me that you're able to make these kinds of decisions for yourself and how you're living. What are you planning from a family legacy perspective? I mean, you're very young, you've not yet found her, so your immediate family is still the one you inherited, not the one you're creating. But what are your thoughts on legacy? You remember Bishop asked me that question from the stage, and I was able to tell him my thoughts on legacy. What are yours, especially family legacy?
This is a really complex question, and I've had a lot of time to think about it, and will continue to think about it. In one idea, I really want my kids to see what dad did and to live in the fruits of that labor. But I also recognize why I am where I am today. And it's because I did not have, and I had to discover what it meant to make it and to understand the value of what it would be and to understand that I like to do the work that provided that. So I think in some cases it depends on my kids' personality and their behavior and attitude. But also it's something I still have to land on in understanding, will my kids have access to it all and they can build on top of what I have? Do they get a piece of what we have to understand, what's been done, but now it's on you to go build what's next for you? Because often as I sit in spaces as a 25-year-old, multimillionaire, I'm exposed to a lot of different families and a lot of different structures. And I've seen the worst and I've seen the best. And I've learned, as much as I love the idea of the kid getting access to it all, I've also seen the other side of the nepotism that comes with it, right? In the spaces and the environments. And so this is something I'm still figuring out. And it will be established more, I think, as I see what my kids look like, how they behave, their personalities, their EQ, their IQ. But I will say this, in terms of legacy and impact on the world, I do see it really important that beyond what my kids walk away with for their personal wealth and personal endeavors, that there is a big portion of that will be philanthropic, to be sure that we're helping Black and brown communities that looked like where I was, 20 years ago, be given the education, the exposure, and the access to technology, to accounting, to marketing, to understand all these different career paths, aviation, and to give them an opportunity to explore and be developed in those spaces. So philanthropy will be a big portion of the legacy. How much my kids get out of this, we'll see. That is to be determined. And that will be on somebody's news station at that point in 20 or 30 years.
That is quite smart, and that's absolutely the direction that I've taken as well. And I am thrilled and feel so blessed that I'm in a place where I see the INEQ of our children being at a level where they can manage not only the money and the financial aspects of their inheritance, but the goodness and the quality of their lives and the impact that that means to the world. So I'm grateful, and I pray that I'm encouraging you, it can be achieved as well. How do you define success? We all refer to you as successful. How do you define it for yourself?
So there was a point in my life where I was doing all the talk shows. I was on Bishop Jakes' talk show and the Steve Harvey talk show, and was getting calls from The Real and The View and so on and so forth. And I mean, it was so bad that I was signing people's foreheads in airports from just how viral this story was going. It became a time where a lot of the interviews were simply about, Jaylen, what's your net worth? How much have you made this year? And that was becoming the headline. And so it's important to me, and I did a video at the time called Redefining My Success. It's important to me that today success is not about the money. It's not about the number of employees that we have. It's about the proximity of our reality to God's call for our life. And I think that proximity is often measured by our true joy, our true happiness, and our true freedoms. The more that our joy, our happiness, and our freedoms are in excess of a baseline, I believe that means we're closer to what God has called us to do. And for me, the closer I can get to that call, that is what success is for me and for my family and for those who are around me.
That's beautiful. In my life, I've borrowed the definition Earl Nightingale gave of success, which is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And it sounds very much that you partnered to that. You reference getting closer to God's call. Where does faith figure in your life, your business, and your decision protocols?
My faith is unequivocally the foundation and priority for every decision. That is the foundation for and the guide of every decision I've made and we make as an organization. I think case in point, our mission statement for Bledsoe Collective is people, period. When I think about the priority of Jesus Christ, it is the development of people, it's the care for people, it's the protection of people. And so that is a guiding principle in every decision that we make and I make as an individual. For me, faith in my relationship is something that I will be as loud about as I can with the direction that God gives me. When I walk into a room of executives in business, and you will feel the same way, I know in some rooms, my reference of scripture will be the theme of the scripture, not the scripture reference point. But in some rooms, I can preach a sermon and it will be received. And it's my job as a man of faith and a man of influence in certain circles to understand how to introduce the word into that environment to help develop and expose the community to maybe what they have not been exposed to, or to celebrate what you already know. And so I believe, again, it's my job and my call to spread the word of God in the way that makes sense for the spaces that I'm in to help advance those communities to get closer in their own right to the word that I know and that you know is true.
We have to have a conversation on how to do that at a different time, because that's the big subject. And let me tell you, Jaylen, that there are many people who I meet, men and women, who are of a mature age, relative success, great impact and influence, and have not figured out how to do that. So we have to have a conversation about that. But before we start talking about having future conversations, can we move forward and play my 4 for 4 yet? Is there anything else we need to cover before we do that?
No, let's do it. I'm ready for you.
Okay. So, Jaylen, I'm going to ask you 4 questions to which you'll give me 4 answers. All answers are correct. Given that the first question must be people from the past to the present, not future. Okay, I know you're in tech, so don't design me a humanoid on this. Okay, or maybe you can, because here's the question. You get to invite 4 people to dinner from any period. Who's at your table and why?
If I had 4 guests at my dinner table, I think obviously the current OG, Barack Obama, will be at the table. Secondly,
Why?
I would,
You said obvious, but why?
well, I'll give you some, because all 4 that are coming to mind, I think will tie together. So it'll be Barack Obama,
Okay.
MLK,
Mhm.
Abraham Lincoln, and I want to say Bishop Jakes.
What a baller table.
It's a table. It's a table.
Wow.
And I think why, when I think of this group, it speaks to, I don't know if it's generational, if it's the decades, if it's the era of legacy that each one has
Mhm.
played into the next. You know, Abraham Lincoln made space for someone like an MLK to exist in the decisions. And I would want to understand from Abraham Lincoln how he just made that decision in a world that was not for that decision to free slaves. Secondly, MLK made space for a Barack Obama. And I would want to understand from MLK how he made the decision to be who he was in a world that was not supportive of that entirely, and to put his life in the line forward. And I would say, I think Bishop Jakes made way for Barack Obama as well.
Mhm.
I think the influence of faith in the teaching of hope before it was called hope to a generation of people. And then, of course, Barack Obama, how he lived and operated in the way that he did in a world that did not fully support who he was or his identity. So I think that will be my table, because I'm here to learn, to grow, because I'm looking at the next decade of impact, the next generation, the next era, the next 100, 200 years from what I can do on this earth today.
What a table. What a table. I'm going to serve at that table so I get to enjoy that
Oh,
conversation.
fun, you're there.
So you referenced wanting to understand how Lincoln made his decisions. There is a book called Forced to Glory. Read the book, and then let's have a conversation about that as well. and we can have two topics on our next conversation. That, and we can also talk about well, you know what? I'm not even going to limit ourselves. Let's just go 2 for 4, okay?
Let's do it.
Which is, what 4 books do you recommend to our family and why?
So I knew this question was coming. So my bookshelf typically rotates books weekly based on videos that I'm doing to kind of speak towards what I'm reading or what I think you should read. So let's see what we have over here. Daniel Coleman's Emotional Intelligence. Again, it's not EQ. It's not IQ. It's EQ.
Uh-huh.
Impact Players by Liz Wiseman. How to Take the Lead, Play Bigger, and Multiply Your Impact. It's about team, about legacy. It's a great book. Of course, Bishop T.D. Jakes' Disruptive Thinking. That's it. If you don't have it already, you're missing out on something. I gotta tell you that one.
Oh my goodness, that book is one that you open and you don't put it down until you finished, right?
Absolutely. And then my last one, and this is probably my most recommended book from the last 4 years. I did a conference on this. It's called The One Thing by Gary Keller. In a world where we want to multitask, in a world that we want to do a million things, this book is about getting in line and how do I do something today that impacts tomorrow with full initiative, full effort, full energy, and full focus to knock down the biggest building because of sequential development and impact. So The One Thing by Gary Keller.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to be sharing your recommended reading list with your as your recommendation. So thank you for that. Okay. We're talking music now. Give us 4 you're listening to and why.
So classic, John Legend's Ordinary People. That's just a classic. It's in the library. Secondly, Music Soul Child's Teach Me. It's one you
Oh
can't.
my child. Oh wow. You're the first person who referenced that, and I so love. Go on, tell us why.
I mean, it's in the context of love and relationships. The story of that song is, show me what you need, show me what you want, and I'm here to grow. You know, I might not have seen it in my own life or in my own home, but I can do it for you if you show me what that is. So I think that's such a critical story and just speaks to what love really should be.
You're in a soul with me. Wow.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, oh yeah. I give me 2000s, 1990s, and I'm all in. That's just where I'm gonna live at in music. I think thirdly, it's a classic piano song. It's the first classical song I learned to play on piano. That's Beethoven's Für Ellie.
Mhm.
That is my party song. That's my first song that I learned to play, and I will play it until I die. So I'd love just to hear it. And lastly, there's a song by a good friend. Her name is Coco Jones, and it's a song called ICU. And the reason that this song is on my playlist, I've known her for, I don't know, 12, 13 years. But to see her journey of like wanting to be somewhere out of early childhood fame, and then to finally get the opportunity, you know, being on the reboot of, let me get the name of the show first, and I'll come back to it. What's the Will Smith show? Oh my gosh. Fresh Prince. So being on the reboot of Fresh Prince, to see the arc of her life, to have fame, to go into the space of a barren place, and to just really focus on God and to see the outcomes of that being a second chance and a much bigger chance than her first, really speaks to just who I think God has called us to be, but also the opportunities that he gives us if we're consistent and faithful. So ICU by Coco, Für Ellie, Music Soul Child's Teach Me, and John Legend, Ordinary People.
Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. We can just put it on repeat. And listen, when we do our next conversation, we're going to do it with you at your grand piano, okay?
Let's do it.
Okay. So, before we hug each other so long, give me the 4 pieces of advice you think would be best for our family, any member of our family right now to follow. And Jaylen, if it's advice that was shared to you from someone else, please give homage to the person who shared it.
Absolutely. So the first piece of advice would be from that attorney who invested in me with time and development, Paul Hales. He pulled out this comic from a newspaper, and it was a dog at a computer. And essentially it said, no one knows on the other side that behind this computer is a dog. And so no matter your age, no matter your race, no matter your gender, technology has provided an outlet and a door to create without having to show identity first, to showcase skill, to showcase effort, to showcase energy, and let that sometimes lead the conversation first before you have to identify as who you are, because your skill should make way for you, not who you are and what you look like. Secondly, this is a quote that I did on an interview years ago, and it's made rounds, and it's, don't let your setback cause you to sit back. When you fall down and the world's laughing at you, prepare for your comeback. You know, failure sets up success. As long as we can learn from that failure, we're in a much better pathway. Thirdly is do it. Everyone says it, just like Nike, just do it. We often spend a lot of time preparing and planning and never get to a space of doing because we're stuck in this ideation phase. And sometimes it just takes us putting our foot out there and take our leap of faith. May not see, step 3 and 4, but we see step 1 and 2, and that's enough to get moving because we put faith on the other side of that, of what we can't see. And fourth is I would say, stop seeking motivation. Stop seeking external motivation. I don't need to go to a conference and pay $10,000 to be in the room to hear from someone to know that I can do what I've been called to do. I think there's a space to learn, to be given tools, but oftentimes we're now in a society, especially post-COVID, where you can go online and scroll through Instagram, scroll through YouTube, scroll through TikTok, and have a million gurus on how to be the best version of yourself and how to build this e-course and how to become a millionaire and how to, from people who've never done it for themselves. And their entire business model, their entire space of motivation is getting you to click that video, to pay them that fee, to build this self-fulfilling funnel of interest and revenue. And so it's a lot to say, but at the end of the day is find you one person who inspires you, find you one person who can educate you, who can teach you, who can develop you, but don't spend your entire life searching for the next motivational piece of content or the next guru or the next coach, because you may find yourself spending a lot of money in spaces that you could better be using it to grow your business with true outcomes versus simply what YouTube gives you for free every day at the search of a button.
So glad that you, Jaylen, said teach, educate, and develop, because that's the true TED talking, okay? Teach, educate, and develop. And candidly speaking, when people, and they often do, will say, oh, you were so inspiring, or oh, you inspired me. I think then that perchance I failed because my goal was to teach you, to educate you, and to develop you. And through that, you can inspire yourself. Having said all of that, you've done a TEDdy talk with me. You've taught, you've educated, you've developed, and yes, Jaylen, you've inspired. From my heart to your home, thank you.